begin now. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again at another one of our programs. Here in the shul, as we mentioned before, we're really trying our best, working very hard to try to offer an array of activities and programs in order to engage everyone during these highly unusual times. And I want to publicly thank Rachel Gould for organizing a new series, a new track in our programming slate, and that is the Meet the Author series. And tonight is the first presentation in this new and most definitely going to be an interesting project. So I want to thank Rachel for organizing it. And as we all know, at the Fifth Avenue Synagogue, we have some highly talented community members. Very impressive individuals, and one of them is most definitely Larry Gould. He recently, we'll hear more about his career accomplishments, but he recently wrote a book called The Making of Mr. Irresistible, which is rising on the Amazon bestseller list, which is a very exciting accomplishment, impressive accomplishment. It is an autobiography about Larry's life. And the focus, the theme of it is, how to take challenging and difficult situations and try to make them into meaningful and positive experiences, and all through a Jewish perspective on the various challenges of life. And most definitely it's been written as an inspiring way. And today's conversation, we look forward to having a stimulating, interesting conversation about the book. I also like to thank Larry and Michelle for their support and their commitment to our community. We are very, very fortunate to have them as members at the Fifth Avenue Synagogue. And they recently were blessed with their 7th grandchild, Enzo, who I'm sure is a source of a lot of happiness to them. And please, God, we only wish you, Larry and Michelle, only good health, happiness and success, joy from your children, and you continue to do from Michael Achayel, from one project to the next project, bigger and better, and continue to do all the impressive work and find the inner satisfaction. And we thank you again for everything that you do for our community.
Okay, so thank you. Really kind words, Rabbi Babbage. Very appreciated.
So Rachel will now give a formal introduction.
Thank you, Rabbi, so very much. Well, what a tremendous privilege it is tonight to introduce Larry Gould as we launch Fifth Avenue's new Meet the Author series. Larry is here tonight to speak with us about his new book, The Making of Mr. Irresistible. You will hear about Larry's incredible journey from public housing in Leeds, England, to the highest level of success within his industry. Larry founded the Big Word Group in 1980 as a recruitment and language service provider. He then grew the Big Word into one of the top 20 language companies in the world with revenue in excess of $100 million. The Big Word works with many of the world's biggest and best known brands and a growing number of government organizations in both the United States and the UK. Every month, the Big Word handles 1 million minutes of telephone interpreting, 17,000 face-to-face interpreting assignments, and 500 million words of translation. Larry devotes time to teaching and mentoring, as well as a number of significant philanthropic efforts, including UJA, and on the side manages to maintain a stunning garden. Larry's biggest success, perhaps, was his choice of wife. And my husband, Barry, and I consider it a tremendous privilege to call Larry and Michelle our very good friends. We're fortunate to have Larry as a friend. Fifth Avenue is fortunate to have him within our congregation. And without much more ado, I will turn this over to Larry, truly himself, Mr. Irresistible. You will hear from Larry tonight about his journey and the making of this incredible book, and the purpose behind the book. And in terms of mechanics, our shul president, Jacob Gould, and I, once Larry is done telling us a little bit about the genesis of the book and the why behind the book, we'll lead the conversation in some questions. And then we would love for you, the audience, to submit your questions as well, which you can do through the chat function or Q&A on your computer. And with that, Larry.
Thank you. Thank you for those great words. And it's an honor to be here. And I don't want to talk for too long just about things that are about the book itself. I'm happy for you to
So,
people or audiences to be asking questions. But
so
sorry.
Larry, before you start, why don't we talk about you and how you ended up at Fifth Avenue? So why don't we start with that, please?
Okay, so from me to Fifth Avenue, yes, okay. I am English, as you know, my wife and I are English, and we moved to New York 7 years ago. And we lived in the UK, and as you can read in the book about, we also lived in Israel. And we decided 7 yeyears ago, with the level of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom was so high and so problematic, and we had lived again in the book, you can read about the 2 years we lived in Israel, and we still have a home in Israel. We decided for ourselves and our 3 children that we felt that the United States, and especially New York, would be a great place to live. And my mum was born in Brooklyn, and we had green cards, so we were able to make that choice. And we also have business here. So our main business, the head office is in the UK, but we have offices in New York. So 7 years ago, we moved here. And that was really one of the major reasons, which is ironic today because things in the UK are much better than they've ever been at the moment, and things here are more challenging. But things change, and we still believe that, especially New York, because we know that the best, is a very wonderful place for Jewish people to live. And so too, by the way, we have to say, is Israel, where we'll be spending. Now I'm not running on a day-to-day as a business, that we'll be spending 3 months here in Israel.
Where in Israel is your home?
In Herzliya Patuach.
Oh, beautiful. That's a beautiful area.
So I did work there for 2 years, yeah.
So did you know someone at Fifth Avenue? I'm just curious how we got so lucky to get you at Fifth Avenue.
Well, it's funny. We've moved from the United Kingdom, we moved to Israel, and we moved from Israel to here, then we moved to Manchester, and you're kind of moving schools is a really big deal. So we actually went to see, we looked at a couple of schools, and we looked at the atmosphere of the schools. This was near enough for us to be, and actually the atmosphere at Fifth Avenue was so warm and so English, more kind of thing, warm, and so that's why we chose it, because we went to a few schools and we sat there, but there was something really special about that place and the atmosphere. And the rabbi's sermons were really good. And Barry would chat to me sometimes, very rarely chat to me. And so that was another reason for being there. It's a very warm place to be, in such a big place.
Sure. Well, we're very honored to have you as a member, and we're very appreciative of you devoting time tonight to share your book and your story with the community. So Larry, do you want to start and talk a little bit about your career? Or tell me how.
Okay, so the book is all, I mean, my career spans now 53 years of working. So I think we'll be here all night. So I'll go through some things very, very quickly. I was born in Leeds. I was born in an area, and unfortunately, that my father, who had a business, lost it just after I was born, and so we ended up moving to a very, very poor district. It was a place where we didn't have inside toilets. We didn't even have one in the back. We had one in the street because it was back-to-back houses, and there I lived for my first 5 years. And after that period of time, we managed to move to another housing project, or council houses as we call them, in another part of Leeds, and that had a bathroom, and it was much better than that. And that was very, very interesting, because a lot of my parents' friends actually were more affluent than we were. So interesting, living in an area where there were very few Jews. The schools did have a small amount of Jews, and so you're in that area really feeling different, and also being aware of the financial difference that you experience. From then, at 8 years old, we moved to something called selected housing. That's for people in another area that worked and had and who passed the tests for moving in this sort of better district. This is next door, alongside or part of one of the best Jewish areas in Leeds, and that we moved to when I was 10, and that was really fascinating because in the poor area where there weren't many Jews, we felt like Abraham. And then we moved to where the Jews were and we were living in social housing. The community, the young people made us feel very aware of our difference. So that was an interesting experience for me to have moved and lived there. In that period of time, sadly, when I was 8 years old, my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so my parents were just doing better. My father, who actually was a tailor and a chiropodist, or you call them something else. So it was a very hard time because she had stopped working, which added to the financial, problems. And that was a very, very hard time, extremely hard time. In those days, you were told, and it's not the case today, that with MS you would live 10 years maximum, and what process you would go through. Thank God it has improved hugely. So he really, really didn't, he coped with work and he coped with life, but he didn't cope very well with us. And that was a very hard time. And when you write a book, by the way, it does take you on a journey. And that journey, actually, I'll talk about perhaps a bit later on. So from then, we're now living in this other area. And then my father was promoted and promoted. And my father eventually became a director of partly was Harrods in London, and partly he was in the manufacturing unit, and became successful enough for us to move into a house on the right side of the tracks. So at 13 years old, past my bar mitzvah, which is a big part of the story, the worst bar mitzvah in Leeds is the chapter on. So and there we actually moved to the good area. Phew, what a relief. And also we moved to a school where other Jewish kids were, and phew, I lived on the right side of the track. And a little bit ashamed, but sort of not impressed that I was so relieved with this situation and understanding it at that age. But then what actually happened, the relationship with my father wasn't particularly great, and school was okay, but I never really had any money to do anything. So partly to wind my father up, as we would say, I said I wanted to leave. And in those days, that was the last year you could leave school at 15 years old. And I said to my father, I need money to go and do things. I don't want to stay at school, I want to leave. And again, you read about it in the story. I didn't really mean it. I didn't mean it at all. I just wanted to start aggravating him, I suppose. And he said, I'm going to back you. If you want to leave, you leave. So I found myself working in the departmental store, which again was another environment, which was very strange. So for a Jewish guy in our environment to be working in a store at 15 years old, that didn't kind of fit in with everybody. But again, I never fitted in. So, and I do consider myself a successful failure. And at that time, in actual fact, when I was 16, I became president of Junior B'nai B'rith, which again was not normal for somebody, who was not studying at school. So what happened as to go on, I worked in retailing for a number of years, and because I had very little competition compared to my friends who were all going to universities and competing, I actually got promoted, and I promoted quite a lot. It's now Walgreens, but at 19 years old, I was responsible for the store openings of stores for the non-food parts of what now is Walgreens there. So there I was, not fitting in again. Did I fit in with these people older than me, traveling around the country doing that? No. But all the time at the back in my life was Uncle Cyril. And Uncle Cyril was my mother's first cousin, our only relative. And Uncle Cyril lived in New York. And Uncle Cyril was very wealthy. And Uncle Cyril wrote to me every 3 weeks from the age of 8. And so again, the letter came one day and said, I'm getting older, I want Larry to come to New York, and I want to teach in the business, and I want to come. And this was the equivalent to, this was really an amazing thing, to come to New York and to be in the business. And I remember—
How old are you now? I'm sorry.
I'm now 21.
21, okay.
I'm now 21 and I'm in New York, and I've had a girlfriend from 16 years old whose parents lived in America, in Staten Island, who came every year for 6 weeks till I was 21. probably the connection was the American things. I had a girlfriend, I had a job, I had a 21st birthday, I had a new car, which I was terrified to drive, and I was living in Manhattan. It was like a dream from where I came from. And it had electric curtains in the room, and I remember closing them and opening them. To cut a long story short, which you'll have to read about, I would say I was a failure in that environment. I was a failure dealing with my uncle. I was immature, and I was very miserable and very homesick. So after this big leaving party, this big new life, I returned to England, no money, no job, and my dreams were shattered, if you like. So therefore, the career journey takes a turn. And one of the things that I had learned at school, because when you announce that you're going to leave school in those days, you got moved into a class that was preparing you for work. So there were things like engineering, car maintenance, all sorts of things. Well, I did something, I was the first boy to do it, and I did shorthand and typing. Okay, and partly because I love writing, and partly because I didn't hated mechanics and things like that. So when I left school, one of the things I had, even though I worked in retailing, I had that. So when I came back from America, I went to work for an employment agency because I was desperate for work, and I got a job as a secretary. And in those days, even when my friends said even hairdressers wouldn't be a male secretary. So there I was, and that was in a new area. And what happened then, I was then offered a job by the agency. I was then offered a job where I was offered a job, and that's how I got into employment agencies. And again, I don't want to go through every bit of my jobs because it'll take ages. So let's move on from the job, and there's quite a few stories about that. And from that job, one of the things I wanted was a car. So I changed jobs to get a job as sales. And again, that's quite an interesting story, working for an American company called AMF, the American Machine Foundries. And I was the London rep. And again, there's a whole story about my failed driving, how many times I crashed the car and how that affected my career, and what kind of something, which was a little bit dishonest, that I did to cope with that situation, which you can check out. And because of what I did and how I did the work, I actually sold more than anybody else. And I got promoted to export sales, and my manager died, nothing to do with me. And after 2 years, I became export manager. So 26 years old, I was international manager for AMF, and I was selling textile machinery for AMF to the Soviet Union and the European countries. And this machinery made the small composite parts that made up the army for the uniform for the Soviet army. So here I am now in Moscow, in the embassy there, in Romania, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and working 7 months a year in those different countries. And then the book goes on to tell you about my trials and tribulations, and there were plenty of trials and tribulations. And then finally to wanting to be in control of my career. And so what I did, one thing I knew about was employment agencies. So in 1980, when there were 114 businesses a week going bankrupt in the United Kingdom due to the recession, I started an employment agency.
So how old are you in 1980?
In 1980, I was 28.
28. Okay, so you had 7 years in London.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're 28 now.
And for the last, since from 25 really to 28, I was 7 months a year abroad in different countries, backwards and forwards with them. So now what do I start? An employment agency. Everybody's been made, closing down. And the other thing I started was a language company, because one thing I learned by working for AMF and working in these areas, saying that the British were the only people who were worse than the British were the French and the Americans at speaking the customer's language. And I introduced a lot of translation work and a lot of communications. And therefore I started a very small translation business, but the main business was the language business. And I'll take you to now 1996, a nice gentleman called Mike Milliken, although I never met him. His people bought my business.
Wow, that's incredible. Michael Milliken's a legend. That's amazing. So 1 second. So 1980, you start this employment agency on your own, self-funded, correct?
No, I have a partner, and that's a very important part of the book. A partner who I actually buy out within the first 2 years. And that's a very, I think on the business side, an entrepreneur, that's a very interesting story to read. The business partner happened to be my best friend and happened not to want to sell out. So that's a kind of interesting thing. I think people may get something that was very traumatic.
Are you still friends? You still best friends?
We're still not best friends. I had a very hard time, and then we became friends again. So we are friends still.
Okay. So in 1980, you have this. You took all your experience and you find this niche.
Yes.
Because you realize that salespeople don't know how to communicate to customers in different languages. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. That people didn't bother speaking their language. There were also very important things that happened in the world that helped me. The United Kingdom became part of the European Union, which sadly they're not going to be part of it. That meant anything with 3 moving parts had to be translated into their language. Yugoslavia fell, and with Serbia and Croatia. The Soviet Union fell, and then all those countries that had to trade in Russian wanted to trade in Ukraine, their own languages. That created another huge amount of business. And so the kind of timing, in a way, was wonderful. And by 2000, by the way, on the language side, I mean, I sold out in 1990.
1996, you said.
1996, and then I moved to Israel. So here I am for the first time. For the very first time, Michelle and I had money. We had a nice life because the business was doing well.
One thing you didn't mention in the whole history is when you met Michelle.
So we advertised in the Jewish Gazette, and this very sweet, shy girl came to see me, and she was doing bilingual. She was a bilingual secretary, and she came for an interview, and she was very, very sweet, and her rates were very low, by the way. I have to tell you, between you and I, they were very low rates. And so she came along, and she did all the tests, which were absolutely brilliant for us to work, really organizing the office and also running the very, very small language business. She had 3 languages fluently and 4 as well. And she came along, and we offered her a job, and her eyes filled with tears. And she said, "I have to tell you something, Mr. Gould, I'm Jewish." And I said, "Oh, are you?" And I didn't say anything. And she said, "Yes." And she says, "And also on the Sabbath in the winter, I need to go home early. And is it possible if I worked through my lunch hours and kept my thing?" I said, "Yes, we'll try and accommodate that." And so then this is where Michelle Clark came to join the business. And she came, and she was the sweetest. She was hardest working, very, very clever, and very shy. And then if you read the story in the book, then you'll see what happened. And that was the cleverest and best thing I ever did in my whole life.
That's great. So what year did you and Michelle get married?
We got married in 1982.
82. Okay, so 82. So that's in your second year. That's about when you bought your partner.
Yeah, and that was about bought a partner, and Michelle was having a baby, and then your view becomes slightly different.
Got it. Okay, so 1996. Tell me about the story with Michael Milliken. How does he find out about your business? Did you meet in person?
Well, I didn't meet in person. It was Michael Milliken's organization.
Okay.
And they came along, and they said that we're looking for a cornerstone business to set up, and we think you'd be brilliant, and we'd like you to join, and like to buy you. And then we went out to the market to sort of compare their price, and they paid a good price, and we suddenly had money beyond it was like a win. And it was also like a very public thing, because they wanted publicity, which I loved. And Michelle hated, kind of thing. So it was very public that we sold out. And
so 1996, you decide, you mentioned earlier, you're going to Israel because anti-Semitism is on the rise in London?
No, we came to America in 2014 or
because of anti-Semitism. But 1996, you're going to Israel.
96 is because Michelle always wanted to live in Israel. She was going to move to Israel and she stopped to marry me. And so we said, well, we can have a home there now.
Beautiful.
For 2 years. But we want to, and we also wanted to give something back. So I had a very unusual situation. I was the Director of Employment Services for UJIA, which is our equivalent to UJA. I was also a professional worker for them as well. So Michelle and I set up 8 job centers around Israel, which we did. So that was Israel. That was a very, very interesting thing. A huge culture shock, have to be my own boss, having to answer to the donors, and actually to work on that side was very interesting, challenging for me. And so after that period, again, that's in the book, and then after the contract was up in 2 years, I absolutely desperately missed England and desperately missed having my own business. So we returned to the language company that was still there in the building I owned, and my sister ran it. It was doing $300,000 a year then. And from that period on, we actually grew that business. Last year was $110 million.
So I'm sorry, the company you returned to was not the one you sold to Milken. That was another one that you had.
Well, the only thing we didn't sell to Milken was the translation part of it.
Interesting, because I would think he'd won everything, but you kept that for yourself.
I kept it because I had a sister and she worked in it, and I didn't want to.
Smart.
So that's why.
So this is like 1998. You come back to rebuild that business.
So 1999, I come back to not rebuild the business because I wasn't interested in it, and then early 1999, the dot-com boom.
Yes.
And then my sister Diane said to me, look, the internet and translations, and we're getting work, and I've been asked to quote for things. This is wonderful. So adding that on to the European Union and the splitting up of the former Soviet Union, it was actually really great for the market. And so then I went back into that business, and really we've grown mainly because of our technology that we put into it more than anything. And we've grown to, I think we're number 17 in the world now. We're in 15 different countries.
So this is your company. You still own it today, correct?
Yes, I still own it. Yes.
Wow. So and the focus of the company is translation. Is it back to your old mission about salespeople knowing how to talk?
Well, that is something different. That is my big thing. I mean, and I worked at training people, but no. I mean, for example, to give you an example of some of the work we do, if you are in Afghanistan and you're out on patrol, or although they're not on patrol in the way that they were before, we've got 60 people working in Afghanistan. If you're in Ukraine and and you're the Canadian Air Force, we're selling planes to the Ukrainians, and they need to know how to train them, and they need to know and they need to translate their manuals where they're in Ukraine. And so they were in a lot of countries of conflict as well. And at the same time, we're very proud that these elections, and by the way, it's interesting tonight that Mr. Trump has conceded. So that's
yeah, I saw that on CNN. I didn't know if that was.
So we're very proud that we actually provide Yiddish speakers and Spanish speakers and for all the elections in New York. If we go to those areas, then there are people helping, and they'll be the big word people working there, as well as working in courts and hospitals. And then Google is like one of our largest clients that we work with them. Quite a lot.
So I know Rachel has a lot of good questions, but what I want to get to is the focus of tonight. So tell us about writing this book. What was the impetus, the timing of it? You've done it. You've done everything. You have a great career. You're building your business, but what made you think about putting that on paper?
Okay, so there were 3 reasons why I wrote the book. First of all, it was coming up to our 40th anniversary. And I felt that we should celebrate it, and we have all sorts of, although, you know, we've had to change the way we've done it. So just over 2.5 years, 3 years ago, I decided that I would write a book, and that book was really about the history of the business. So this book really has got it, but it's a very small part of the book. It's not really that much. It started off that way. The next thing that influenced me was Ancestry.com. Now, my mother and father were only children, so I had no aunts, no uncles, no cousins.
Sure.
So now, going on to Ancestry.com, I can boast I have over 3,236 cousins around the world. And that became a bit of an obsession, and I looked to see where they came from, you know, mainly Ukraine and Poland and Russia and whatever. And then I looked at where I knew where they came from, what happened to the Jews in that particular area. And so what happened to the Jews in the area, generally they were either killed by the people locals, or they were shipped off to concentration camps. And, you know, whatever happened to them. So that was really had a really strong effect on me. So I decided I really wanted to write as much as the family history as the history of our family, going back to my grandfather in this book. And that was how I started to write the book, and why I started to write the book. But it changed because I use the method. I don't know if anyone's interested about how do you write a book. And this is my second book, by the way. Isn't it, Rachel? Yeah, this is my second book. And the other one was done in a completely different way. It was a book that required a lot of research and a lot of, you know, input from the researchers. This one was about my story. And so I use a pencil, and I'm a very good typist because, as you know, I'm qualified, but I use a pencil and paper. And when you're writing, you start writing, and it opens a door into your past. And people say, when you read the book, how could you remember all these things? Well, I can remember it because I was in that zone of thinking. And as you're writing it, and it's just you and the paper, you can tell the paper anything you want. And you write things, and there are things in the book that I'm upset, that made me cry. There are things in the book I'm really proud of, and there are things in the book I'm not very proud of as well. So when you're writing these things down, it doesn't matter. You can write what actually happened and how you felt and what you did, and then you can decide to get rid of it or not. So that is how I approached it. But then, I don't know if any of you know Rabbi Levi Welton.
Rabbi, the name again, please?
Rabbi Levi Welton.
I don't know him personally.
He used to be in the Hamptons. He was the junior rabbi here, and he did writing as well. And so we would spend many hours. And I said, "Help me, you know, you've written as well." And he'd sit there for a long time, and he would record everything I was saying, and at the same time he would prod me, and he would push me to give more information. So by doing it that way, you're opening those, you know, your memory. And then what it was like, and what did it feel like, and what was the room like, and what was the house like, and how, you know, so that really aided that. And that went on for a period of time, which was really fantastic. And without his help, I wouldn't have done the book properly. And then the next part that I wanted, it got to a certain point where it was okay, but not really what I was wanted enough of. So the next part that I did, I actually used this fantastic woman, Michelle, met her at UJA when her mother's a Holocaust survivor, and she's a writing coach. And she's called Janet Kirsch. How do you say her second name? She's called Janet, and she really helped me, pushed me, and shouted at me, and told me things were boring and repetitive. And so that's actually how I did, you know, put the book together. I have a fantastic executive assistant who I can dictate to. So I had a lot of help on that side.
So how long did it take you to write this book?
It's really been 3 years in the making. But the big push has been COVID, because being here in the Hamptons is a great place. But it's taken about 3 years of writing it. But I've written it probably half of the time I've been here. And as I say, it's been very cathartic. As I say, there's times when it's been very difficult, but it's been the most amazing experience to do that and write those memoirs.
Wow. Wow. So you feel like you wrote it at the right time in your life and your career.
Yes, I think I did, and I think the book is not about my career, Sim. I mean, the book is about my career. The book is about somebody who fails a lot. And what I'm most proud about is that it's not like he failed once. I've failed more than once, and in more than one way. I failed in personal relationships, and I failed in business and work. And
yeah, I think that's a very important, again, I haven't read the book yet, but, you know, Rabbi Babish will speak afterwards, but it's sort of his Devar Torah this Saturday, his sermon that he gave in synagogue about, and Rabbi Sachs was recently quoted about, you know, failure shouldn't take you away from your determination. But to actually have someone like yourself that proves that, I think that's probably why it makes it a bestseller.
yeah, I think it does, and I think it does. I mean, I think one of the things that I've found out, and I know, you know, again, talking to Holocaust survivors is also interesting, is however bad things are, you have choices. We even had choices in the concentration camp. You have choices. So one of the things that I think affected me was my mother. She had MS. She would fall over sometimes. And when it was my bar mitzvah, it was pretty grim, and she had to be carried upstairs, and it was touch and go whether she would make it. But she would fall down and say, "This is so boring," you know, and I'll be glad when this has passed and I'm feeling better. And it did pass, and she did feel better. And you know, when I got married, my mum walked with my dad and I down the aisle.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So it is about, you know, you have a choice, right? You come back, you've got no money, you've got no job, you've burnt your bridges with this very wealthy guy, but you've got choices, Larry. What's your choices?
Beautiful.
So I think the best thing that I kind of reflected on, that even in dire situations, those choices. My father had choices to leave us, and he didn't. You know, so there's all sorts of different things.
Beautiful. You know, it sounds very meaningful. So I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to give the floor to Rachel, because I know she has some good questions. Rachel?
Yes, thank you. So I have read the book and I love the book. It's so rich. There are so many poignant moments in the book. My husband Barry agrees with me. So for anyone who hasn't read it yet, it's a very easy book to read with an incredible flow. And it's such an honest telling of your story, but there are a number of painful experiences, which, you know, as you were saying earlier, you turn to the positive, and you know, through this process of personal examination, find the good in so many of these moments that began as a moment of pain. So one of them that I thought was particularly poignant was in the chapter that's titled "The Worst Bar Mitzvah in the History of Leeds." And I was wondering if you could tell us why it was the worst bar mitzvah in the history of Leeds.
So it was, I mean, you go to Cheder. So it wasn't that I didn't go to Cheder. And I went to Cheder from 6 years old till 13 and still didn't know anything. And I think I went because it was, my mum again wasn't well and got us out the house. And we went Monday to Friday, and we went Sunday mornings. And it was like the old days where the rabbi would rap my knuckles to wake me up and things like that. And there's a story about that. So, of course, when you get to your bar mitzvah, everybody's talking about their bar mitzvah party. And I remember when I got to my bar mitzvah, and it's about the invitations going out, and sort of people who didn't have money in those days, kind of what the situation was, that you would get your bar mitzvah money, gelt, you know, the people would give you money normally in England. I don't know what they do in America. And then you give that to your parents, and that would pay towards the due. So my parents were completely against that. My mother, because of her multiple sclerosis, her illness, was very, very anti-religion. And so I was brought up with my father, who loved going to shul, and who my mum then decided she wasn't going to light the Shabbat candles. So this is an interesting kind of place that I'm in, and it's my bar mitzvah coming up. And, you know, my mother's not excited. And I said, when are my invitations going out? She said, well, we're not sending them, they're wasting money, we can just ask people. So again, when I was writing the book, and I used to think, how mean. In fact, when I was 40, Michelle made me a bar mitzvah in shul. My parents were there, by the way, and she threw sweets, and the rabbi was there and made the thing, that kind of thing. So, look, I had a mum who was sick, a father who wasn't coping very well, and actually it was a joyless affair. We went to shul, and there was a kiddush kind of thing, and then everybody went home, and that was it. And it was a shock because it wasn't that I hadn't gone to other people's. If everybody was like that, it would be, even however poor they were, they had some simcha. And it's not about money. You could have a cake and have joy. And so that was when, and there's a picture of me in the book sometimes, and it shows this miserable bar mitzvah boy. So that had a real effect on me. It was sort of like I was the only one that didn't send out invitations. And again,
and for a teenager in particular, right? And for a teenager, that kind of thing particularly stings.
Teenage now, so Michelle, I'm mad about birthdays even now, never mind teenager. And people say, well, I don't want to donate something. I said, I want a present to open, I'll donate, you know, kind of thing. So it was like, it was just joyless. And one of the things is, though, you survive that. And actually, do you know something? It made me more celebrate everything afterwards, and made me more see that joy. And again, you know, as my father became successful, and as my mother coped, you know, for many, at 50, she managed to drive a hand-controlled car, you know, it also changed. And writing it and thinking, I don't know how I would have felt making a bar mitzvah when my mum is dying, my wife is dying, you know, as far as he was concerned. What's there to celebrate? So that was kind of the situation there.
Yes, but like part of the reason I brought that up was because you took that experience and you parlayed it into one of the more amazing stories that I've heard related to philanthropy. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you then did many years later within the Ethiopian community in Israel.
Right, so 6 weeks before we sold our business, we were making our son Joshua's bar mitzvah. And, you know, you're always worried about the cost, and, you know, even whatever level, sometimes there's always sort of some concern about the cost and what you're doing and if it's right. So 6 weeks before, this deal with Mike Milliken's organization went on for about a year. So 6 weeks before his bar mitzvah, we signed. And I remember saying to the caterer, you know, we said we're having a very big reception. But I said, we don't need an hors d'oeuvre after a big reception. And I remember ringing her up and saying, you know, Susan, the chicken soup's back on, you know, because we'd sold out. And we had balloons, and we had this most fantastic event. And we knew that we were going, the people invited didn't know we were going to live in Israel. I was going a couple of weeks later, ahead of everybody. But we didn't announce it because we didn't want to take it away from Joshua. So when we got to Israel, one of the groups I was involved with and still involved with is the Ethiopian. And one of the things that they asked me, they said, you know, we want to put on an Ethiopian, a bar mitzvah for these kids. And don't forget, in that time, they were the ones that actually had walked and had really suffered. We want to make a bar mitzvah for them. I want to make it in Jerusalem and bring them to Jerusalem. Will you support that? So I said, okay, I'll support it. And they bought it, and they were allowed to bring 2 people. So a lot of them with both parents, and some with one parent and a brother or sister. And in the hotel, the Imbal Hotel in Jerusalem, and it was at the wall, and the chief rabbi, Alao, came, and it was really wonderful. And on the back of the chair, the bar mitzvah, my son, I remember, and I'm ashamed to say this, I think we had like 2,500 balloons at his bar mitzvah in shapes. It was just over the top, but that's, on the back of the chair, there was one balloon tied on all the backs of the chairs. And these kids could not concentrate on anything but the balloons. And then when we undid them, that they floated up, it was just wonderment. And I felt, first of all, sick at the money I'd wasted, and how these people were so excited, these kids were so excited about one balloon. And so from there, and I'm glad to say, we're in our 25th year, I think we've done about 700, and it's a whole year's program, the Ethiopian Bar Bat Mitzvah program. And then as it developed, and you could see the people coming from the north in the coaches, into Jerusalem. It was a whole 4 days, 5 days. But the best thing we did is we twinned them with British Bar bat mitzvah kids. And one of the things that they do in the twinning of them is the fact that they write to each other, and we translate, you know, or they're translated backwards and forwards. And these English kids, having to talk to people and have a twin at a different level economically in every way than they have, was a really fantastic thing. But what the most fantastic thing is when they bring them to Jerusalem and meet them, and they go to their homes and give them the gift, and they spend 3 days. It has been cut down because of COVID this year, you know, and they meet them. It has such an amazing, and one of them, in actual fact, we you know, they've been to weddings now, they're older, and that has had more effect on young Jewish people and the families of the Bombat people. It was absolutely sensational. That's the best thing, most exciting thing I've ever done. I've got payback from a miserable bar mitzvah on that side.
Very much. Beautiful, beautiful. So, Larry, another thing I wanted to ask you about was you had a number of experiences you relate in the book that seemed to affect you as a Jew and your life as a Jew, your religious feelings. And one of the ones you mentioned is, you know, working in the USSR in the 1970s. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what that was like and how it affected you as a Jew with everything that was going on in the USSR at the time.
Well, so that particular stage, was I interested in going to shul? Yeah, on the social level sometimes. To go to shul, was I very committed? You know, not particularly committed, you know, not anti it, but I think I would say strongly indifferent to everything Jewish, except my friends were all Jewish. I mean, it was, so that was the environment that I was in. And I think that was because there was a lot of anti-Semitism as well, and that it wasn't because of the beauty of Judaism, it was because, you know, there was a lot of bullying and stuff going on, to be honest. So then I went to work in Russia. When I went to work in Russia, there was I can't remember, it's like, it says the 37s, it's not that number, but there was an organization, and they would give me sidorim and things to take to the shul in Moscow. And I didn't think it was that dangerous, but it was a little bit dangerous, and I would pretend I wasn't, you know, scared to do it, and I would go and see them and just drop the things off. And then you would meet them. But then you're meeting the Jews in Moscow who you really realize, I mean, you realize how awful it was for everybody. It wasn't just awful for Jews, but it was much more awful for Jews. You know, they didn't like to admit they didn't want to actually show. And you went to this beautiful shul. And if you looked at the Amida, it was in boards all along the shul because there wasn't enough sidorim to go around, so they would be able to read the boards. But the most interesting thing that I did was in Romania. In Romania, I knew of a family in Leeds, had family still left in Romania. And I actually, and before I went to Hungary, so I went to Hungary, and wherever I went, I wanted to do a Jewish tour. And they took me, and I was in they took me to the Danube, and the guy was showing me where the new synagogue has been built and what had actually happened. And we stood on the top of the Danube looking down, there's Buda and Pest, and we're looking down on the city, and I'm saying, this is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And he said, I don't want to upset you, but you see, where we're standing is where lots and lots and lots and lots of Jewish people were standing. They would have them standing here, Larry, and then they would shoot them and push them into the Danube. That's what they did to us. And so that had a profound effect. And because I worked so much in the Soviet Union in all the different places, so then I began to really feel like nobody else has, not many people have the opportunity that I've had to actually visit those places as they are now to a point in certain things. And that had a tremendous feeling on me as a Jew, and the fact that I have the ability to go to synagogue, to feel free. It's just so undervalued. It's so undervalued. And so many people in so many places, even today, are very, very nervous. It's not in Russia as bad, or the Soviet Union as bad as it was. But that had a profound effect on me as a Jew.
And in contrast, you moved to the United States in 2016, where, of course, many of us take for granted we can live freely as Jews. How has it been to be in the United States in these last few years?
Well, I love being in the United States. I love the character of I love the can-do and optimism. I love the fact that we admire people who are successful. In England, you know, we make a big hero of people who fail. You know, the one who came last in the skiing Olympic Games became a big hero, you know, coming last. So I love the can-do part to it very, very much. I don't like the way that Black co-workers of colour are treated by white people. That's very different. Even though we have rights ourselves, there's a real different feeling. That's a bit of a disappointment, I have to say. But I absolutely, my 3 children live here in America and my 7 grandchildren, and they're having wonderful lives at the moment. And I think it's our peril to ignore it. The level of anti-Semitism is very, very high, extremely high. And I think, please, you know, Bezrat Hashem, with this election being over, whoever you want to vote for, you know, whatever, at least it's over. Maybe there's a chance to move forward. But it's at the worst. So that for me is quite a disappointment. But America, I think, is a very, very exciting, wonderful, creative place to be. And, you know, we hope that we will continue living here for many years to come.
You are a wonderful addition. So as we get close to the end of the hour, maybe we could sort of close the loop with you talking a little bit about how you arrived on the terms successful failure, why you're Mr. Irresistible, and where that comes from.
I think that, well, there's 2 things. Successful failure means that when you fail, you go on to being a success. You decide to be a success. Just like my mum was bored when she fell over, she decided when it is going to be over. This failure phase, however awful it is, won't stay the same. It's going to be it. So that's about making that. Now, Mr. Irresistible, obviously it's not just because I'm gorgeous to look at, but there is a real business reason about Mr. Irresistible. When I bought my partner out, and buying my partner out was like a divorce. My partner had done nothing wrong. He was a great guy. He was my oldest friend, and he gambled his money on me. So he had nothing wrong, except do with the deal. That was probably his mistake, and that'll be interesting for maybe to read. Sorry, I've lost the part. What? I've lost it.
I was just asking about the term Mr. Irresistible.
Right. So we have this divorce in the accountant's office where we do the deal, and that's quite traumatic. And I go back to the office. Now, he wasn't in the business with me. He was just a financial backer. My staff knew him, who came in and out. They were indifferent to him, but they knew that I wanted to buy it out, and they you know, knew I was pleased, so they were pleased on that side. And when I went back to the office, I said, you know something, this, you know, now we bought him out and we've got the freedom to do what we want, you know, moving forward. We've got to be so different from everybody else. What can we, give me a word. Let's sit down, and there were, I think there were 7 of us. Let's give me a word that's going to describe about how our business is different from everybody else. And people said amazing, fantastic service, totally professional, and all the kind of sort of stuff. And we had this young, called a YOP, youth opportunity person in those days. And she was very, very Northern English, not great education, not very well educated. And she said, what about words irresistible? I said, irresistible, that's great, Susan. Why don't you look it up in the dictionary and tell us what irresistible means? So irresistible means too attractive and too tempting to resist. Too attractive and too tempting to resist. So what we did then, all through my career, and all through the sales training and sales things that I do a lot of that, and the work I do at Cornell is a Mr. Irresistible course. Now, it kind of embarrasses people when you talk about being this irresistible, you know, but I'm coping. But the whole point about it is that I always challenge people. Is working for the big word irresistible? Is being a supplier to the word irresistible? Is it our services irresistible? And then say, tell me why it's irresistible. Too attractive and too tempting to resist. So really with that, and then we say, well, is that irresistible compared to our competitors? So let's think about something crazy to make it irresistible. And so really, really that is about all the different things in my life. And that's why sometimes, you know, you actually fail, because sometimes you're not always irresistible in what you hope you're going to be. But it's striving for being too attractive. And attractive doesn't mean always physically attractive. Attractive can be very kind. It's very attractive. And being nice, by the way, in business, you can be tough, but being nice is pretty irresistible and has some great benefits. So we in those days had mission statements. Everybody had to have a mission statement. And our mission statement was all about offering being irresistible to our staff, to our clients, and so on and so forth. And so we use that. And when I teach it, when I'm at Cornell, they're always embarrassed when I talk about being irresistible. And then they get used to it, and then it becomes part of our language. You know, when we're talking about how they're saying, how they're putting it forward, you know, what financially is irresistible or ever going to be irresistible about what they're actually doing on that side. So that's where it came from. It came from this wonderful youth opportunity girl who thought about that name. She couldn't spell it, by the way. It took about a while to find out in the dictionary what it was, and that's what we've used and still use it today. Big pressure being irresistible, by the way. Terrible pressure being irresistible.
Help us how to make going to shul irresistible.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the shul should sit down and say, what's irresistible about coming to shul? What's irresistible about our service? What's irresistible about, you know, but after seeing today, I'm sure they'll know what's irresistible. But yeah, it's really, really makes you think about it. Yours was irresistibly warm. For the first time I went into New York, it wasn't just one person that spoke to me. Yeah, people said hello to me, and I was just nervous and shy. And, you know, in this position, I'm not shy. I might want to, and you know what? To come to a place at this age and to have to make friends, it's awful. To have to be interesting all the time is so hard work. But the people, the warmth that I felt by that group of people around me and just all around, and the smiles and the niceness was what it was all about.
Great. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay. So.
Any other questions?
Sorry. I think it's been a wonderful hour. And I just thank you again, Larry, for sharing such a special story of course, your remarkable career success and this amazing story of coming from public housing in Leeds to the top of the industry, but also at each moment engaging in the kind of personal examination and growth that you did. I think is so very inspiring to all of us. And there's something so Jewish about it and the wisdom with which you look back at the steps you've taken. So thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me.
Rabbi Babbage, I don't know if you wanted to share, your sermon was sort of tonight's presentation.
It's always better to learn from real life examples than from a sterile lecture. So we actually heard an inside view of the concepts. But Larry, I wanted to thank you so much for your presentation. It was quite fascinating and interesting. And I was curious myself, you know, you went through so much in your life, many life experiences, both the joys and the challenges, many rich experiences. And thank God you've been blessed to have a successful career and also been blessed to have a wonderful family. Please God, everyone should be healthy and continue to be healthy.
Please God.
I was curious, you know, based on all your experiences of life, you know, you've seen life through many different lenses and many different positions. You know, what values and lessons do you hope to impart to your children and your grandchildren in terms of a legacy of how to approach life based on your experiences? I mean, what do you ultimately hold so dear to you that you really truly want to impart to your children and your grandchildren based on all your fascinating life adventures and experiences?
Well, with regard to the family, the most important thing and the hardest thing is that they should be very supportive and kind to each other. That's the most important thing. And you know, money comes and goes, and it's about being caring for each other. You know, you can have lots of money, tons of money, and really not be happy. But it is about being respectful and caring of each other in this thing. It is hard for me sometimes because my children were brought up in a different way. My children were brought up where we had staff. My children were brought up where we have a chauffeur, you know, and that being that lack of meaning to be sometimes humble about what you've got. So sometimes that's a challenge when you come from two different financial situations. So my kids have been brought up, you know, from the time of seeing, you know, relative wealth to what I did. So really it is about also not taking for granted what you've got, and also for really being dutiful sometimes, you know, kind of thing.
And I think we all have similar experiences like you just mentioned. You know, I often joke that when I was growing up, going to Muncie for Shabbos was a great adventure. That was like, you know, traveling overseas. You know, I've been to Israel only one time till I was 18. My 5-year-old has been to Israel 3 times already. You know? So how do you, you know, based on what you said, I think we all, many of us, you know, have similar sentiments. What's your technique in trying to instill, you know, good values to your children, even though they've not perhaps, you know, thank God and fortunate have not necessarily had to gone through what other people or other struggles people have gone through?
Yeah, I mean, the best thing I have is my wife, Michelle, who is the most, and it sounds awful, kind and nice person on that side. But for us, it is a challenge sometimes because, you know, when you live in an environment, my kids live in Florida, and it's a very different culture to what we're used to and how they are. So one of the things you have to try to do, which I struggle with sometimes, is not to criticize how they are and to kind of encourage them. So it is the challenge, the biggest challenge is that when you come from where I come from, and then because they will never be as excited as I am. I actually, you know, one night laid in bed and I counted up, and this is a terrible thing to say on the screen, and my wife, I actually worked out how many toilets we had in our houses, because we had an outside toilet and we had one at the end of the street. Well, who thinks my kids, it's not fair for them to be so excited that we've got lots of bathrooms about. So the biggest challenge, I think, for people, and it doesn't mean whether you've come from a poor background, is about the appreciation. So one of the things we do try to do is actually, and all my children are involved in some charitable work. So it's about encouraging them to do something and giving something. And that's the best, I think, way to do it. And do some charitable work that they'll like, not, you know, just, and be very careful about how they choose that. So, you know, my kids have all been involved and helped, and they've got very small children, but they're all involved in community. And all 3 of them, you know, one's not so religious, 2 are quite modern Orthodox, and the other one still goes to shul every week. So it's about being part of the community, and that's what's very good. But it really is about giving something back and repeating that, but not making them do things that they don't want to do. It's about trying to find something that they can enjoy, some, you know, on that side. But it is a struggle for all of us. It is a struggle because we're so lucky, and it's so not fair for me, and it's boring for me to say. And I try and never say, well, I never had. I think I'm luckier than they are because I had so little and got so much. I really feel it. So it's being patient about that part. But the other big rule is that they can't fall out with each other, your children. They've got to support each other.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much, Larry. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Larry, thank you so much. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope to see you in person soon.
Yes, I'll phone you this week. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for the warmth that you've given Michelle and I since we've been here.
And we're going to make it irresistible.
And you're irresistible too. Well, Rabbi Babish, I don't want to say, I shouldn't really say this, but we didn't really know. We went to Friday night, and actually behind Rabbi Babish is the secret. That's his wife, because she's amazing. We went for Friday night dinner, and it was a real experience. And he went round the table and asked people's questions. It was such an enjoyable evening. He was just marvelous, you know, and we're vulnerable. You know, you can have a lot of money, you can have whatever, you can be on Central Park South or whatever you want to be, but you don't know anybody, kind of thing. So that's the part that makes it work, not the best seats necessarily, the best kiddish house kind of thing, but it's the other stuff. So with that, I'll bid you good night and thank you for having me.
Good night. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for joining
All
us.
right.